Welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Dads podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jeff Hittner. After more than 200 conversations with fathers, I realized we're not talking enough, not about our fears, nor our ambitions, or how our kids are really doing, or how we're holding up in the middle of it all. This podcast is for the dads trying to build something meaningful and be present at home. The ones caring a lot, questioning if they're doing enough, and craving honest conversations without the filters. If that's you, you're not alone. You are in the right place. Let's figure this out together. So this week we have a great guest. His name is Kelly Griego. Kelly is an endurance athlete, a leadership professional, and a devoted family man and friend who blends service, resilience, and heart in everything he does. He is a dad to 3 teenagers. I can't wait to ask about this. Kelly sees his most important role as being a mentor, guide, cheerleader, and steady presence in their lives. And together with his wife, Megan, he's built a partnership grounded in love, authenticity, and friendship as they navigate their life and their hometown, which is in Madison, Wisconsin. Beyond family, Kelly works as an operations manager at True Stage Insurance Company and serves part-time as a fractional COO of a small business. He is also an endurance athlete who weaves purpose into this passion as much as he can through guiding visually impaired athletes, supporting the Madison community as a Lululemon ambassador, and dedicating each of his races since 2016 to finding a cure for FOP, a rare disease that his best friend's son was diagnosed with that year. So welcome, Kelly. One of the reasons I'm so excited to have you is, again, as we talked about before we hit the record button, this is a conversation for just all of us as dads who are living life and managing a million things. And what I loved in your, brief bio is you're doing all those things. You're a dad. 3, you've got like community engagement that you're involved in. You're obviously like really grounded in where you are. And obviously you also have a job. It sounds like several jobs, which is very American these days as well, right? So I want to ask about all these things. But first, I just want to say welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. This is great. I love the platform, the idea, the concept, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Me too. Thank you. So let's start off with tell us a little bit about your family, because it's not just like 3 teenagers. So tell me a little bit about like the dynamics of your family.
Yeah, well, in simple terms, we're a blended family. So I have the oldest of the bunch who just went off to college. And then my wife's daughter is a senior this year in high school. And then my daughter is the youngest, and she's a junior in high school. So we've been a blended family since, we merged households in 2015. So it's been 10 years. We've been married since 2016. And it's just been a huge learning opportunity, I think, for both Megan and I as adults, as parents, as, what does it mean to be a bonus dad and have bonus kids? It's one of my favorite topics to talk about. And I think, as you were alluding to in the reason for this podcast, is that a lot of these conversations aren't easy to find. Yeah. And so I'm always excited to talk about it, even though that may sound weird. I'm, happy to talk about divorce and all of those things that have led us to where we're at with our family today.
Well, let's jump into that then, because I would love to hear about that too. I mean, I can only imagine, again, dads talk about the biggest challenge they have is balancing everything. And then on top of that, you built like a new blended family. So talk about like what that experience was like emotionally, as well as from an anxiety perspective, all those good things. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel it took a lot of circumstances coming together to be in a place that Megan and I could build and start what we always referenced as our home team. It took a lot of time on my own as a single dad, and therapy and getting in a place that I needed to be as I was learning how do I navigate this with 2 young children? My daughter was 4, my son was 6 at the time, going through divorce, and it really just a good reset and dedication to them. I struggled a lot with with time management, and I never felt like I was doing the right thing at the right time. I was getting into running, and I felt like when I was out for a run, I should be home with the kids. Felt like when I was with the kids, I should be out running, and I was just terrible at that balance. And so having that opportunity to spend the time on my own, to get in a good place, to get comfortable being a dad with the two of them, and find my real rhythm as an individual parent instead of two parents in one household was super important. And it took all that, and Megan doing the same work on her side, me not knowing it yet because I hadn't, we hadn't gotten re-engaged, and that's what laid the groundwork. Just individual stability, individual confidence in yourself as a person and as a parent.
And then, so you come together as a new family, and so you have, three kids that are all within like
3 years.
3 years. Yeah. So what was building their relationships with each other like as a parent?
Yeah, it was fairly natural. One of the things I learned, the kids had a great therapist themselves when we were going through the divorce and separation process. And one of the things that the therapist said that I latched onto and have always tried to put into practice is no surprises. And that was the same with how they were introduced to Megan and her daughter. It wasn't, there's a knock at the door and, hey, welcome. Here's, somebody new that's moving in, or that's my girlfriend, or that's anything. And, it took a process of, the first times that they even got associated, with Megan and Mara were at larger gatherings. And, we realized those weren't happening enough. So we kind of prearranged some where we would invite friends over for brunch, then friends that had kids. And so, it was just more of a safe social setting. And then after time, it's like, hey, Megan, we do brunches and we've met them. And, now we're just going to go to the park and just meet her and Mara, and so it's a slow build of no surprises. And, Megan and I were very aligned with that process, and just the thought of, we're not going to throw curveballs at the kids. And so it was just a natural progression that we just moved forward together. And so the kids became familiar. Young girls are pretty easy. They attach to each other, and we're friendly and everything right away. But their dynamic has grown and changed over time, as you would expect over 10 years. But overall, just having a setting for them to just accept each other and learn about each other was really the platform needed.
Thank you for sharing all that. You talk about therapy. Were you also able to find anyone else going through like building a blended family? I mean, one of the biggest themes that keeps coming up is dads, we're going through so many things and we are not finding the people who might literally be next door to talk about these situations with.
Yeah, funny enough, the year, so 2012, when I was going through 2013, when I was going through my separation, my childhood best friend, the one that I fundraised for, him and his wife about a year before went through a separation process. And in talking with him, I told him what I was going to do. I was thinking about separating, and he made one of the bravest things I ever knew of. He's like, you got to talk to Becky. You got to talk to, the person who chose to leave me. He's like, I think that you two would have a lot to talk about. And I grew up with her as well, but, we were always acquaintances where this was my best friend. And so that whole year, I really spent a lot of time with her because she was one of the closest people that I knew that had gone through the process. And because that is a big thing. I didn't have, other than that couple that separated, I didn't really have a whole lot of people to rely on that had gone through, either starting over fresh as a blended family or, going through the separation process. And that was one of the things that started Megan and my conversation, is just, we don't know a lot of divorced people. And I guess we were ahead of the curve there, because now it's changed. But but that did matter a lot. Just having people to help reassure you that, you can get through, and they've been through it, and just to talk through, how and why, and to see them on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. So, tell me, what were some of the biggest surprises then in the context of when you did all move under one roof? And also just from the standpoint, again, you're still balancing like your career at the same time
Yeah.
and your desire to, I imagine, go on very long runs, and this new family. Talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that going through the single dad part really helped me get the time management and focus that I needed. Because I was even training for big races that year when I was going through the separation, and being able to know this is my non-negotiable time with the kids, and this is the time that I have the flexibility to do what I choose to do with. Um, Really line that up and set the stage for me. And so when we brought the homes together, we were snuggled into this little, 3-bedroom ranch, and we had plans to finish out the basement to make another bedroom. But it was actually pretty easy. Megan was actually having her hip replaced, and so that was part of the reason we moved in early, because she just, needed some additional support at home. All of her family's out east. But everything was just a natural progression. I think really just the way with we set it up. And so bringing us together in one home, the act of it sounds big, but the kids adjusted well and got to say goodbye to old homes and welcome in new. And, yeah, it wasn't as complicated as I would have thought. But I think that's the prep work.
For sure. And from a co-parenting perspective, what is it like to have, been obviously in a marriage, ended that marriage, and then have like a chance to apply kind of everything you learned into something new? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's everything involved with the ending of my marriage to my children's mother. I always just turned and really made it focused on me. Where do I feel I fell short? Where do I feel that I could be better? Where, really reflecting a lot, and trying to become the best person I can be. And so, the co-parenting is tough, because everybody's, you both have your strong thoughts and opinions on discipline, on all these different things, and you really have to buy into the concept of, kind of those could be mom's rules at mom's house, and these are some of the rules that are here, and maybe they're alike in more ways, maybe they're not. And so really trying to teach and understand those concepts isn't easy. Early on, it was the hardest, I would say, in related to co-parenting, because there's so many decisions to make with young kids. There's after school care, there's summer camp, there's, we're trying to navigate how can we blend and mix those things with this new, bonus sibling that the kids have, and where can we overlap, and, trying to make those happen when that's not necessarily the agenda of, co-parents on either side. And, so those were really hard, because there's just so many decisions to make. But, as time goes on, those decisions get less. But I think you also just have to keep trying to let go of the baggage that you carry from the past, and not take it personal. This isn't, me being married to this person. This is me trying to be a communicative, respectful adult and handle adult decisions.
Used a kind of a key word in there that has come up a lot in these conversations, which is shame. When we're coming out of a failed relationship, or maybe that's not even the right word, just a relationship that's come to its natural conclusion, right? For those of us that want to grow and heal, there is a bit of this, vicious shame cycle that you go through. And how does that manifest itself for you? And how have you learned to kind of come out of it?
Yeah, I've really locked into the mindset of I'm making the best possible decisions I can with the information that I have right now. And, the outcome isn't always going to be perfect. And sometimes you feel less than. Sometimes you feel it's not enough. Sometimes you overanalyze and really bring yourself down. But I've never been too much of a shame person because I don't have a lot of regrets. I don't I just feel that in the moments I'm doing the best I can, and so I probably give myself grace
Mm.
where maybe others give a little bit more shame. But really in those reflective personal moments when I really dig deep, I'm obviously my worst critic. And so I can get, a little down about the way some things went. But overall, I feel I go with grace.
Thank you for sharing. It sounds also like you know when to reach out and get support as well to talk through that,
Yeah.
which is so critical.
In a learning process.
Yes, for sure. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing this. I know it's just a vulnerable topic, so I really appreciate it. Talk to me a little bit, like kind of zooming out a little bit. Okay, so you have at least one full-time job, right? And it sounds like some fractional work as well. Talk to me a little bit about, especially in the midst of your personal life, right? Creating a new blended family, and then obviously continuing to try to build your career. What are the things you feel like you got right? And what are the things that you feel like you really struggled with in terms of kind of balancing career and family?
Yeah. I feel I've always had maybe an interesting opinion on career. I've always tried to look at my full-time work as something that gives me the opportunity to do the things I want outside of work. And and so, some people may think, well, you're not putting in 100%, or, you could give more. And I guess I've probably been more of a cynic of that thought process, and that I'm working for these places that if I leave, they just keep rolling along, and them not having this commitment to me that I feel that I don't have on that side. And so um, yeah, I mean, I just love everything outside of work so much, and having the opportunity to be with the kids and help show them all the things that are outside of school and outside of work that I can control and focus. Um, yeah, I think some of the maybe something with work that yeah, that's a tough question. I feel like I'm spinning on that one because I feel that I disassociate between work and home, so strongly,
Well,
and in the
you know what
importance
I,
of the two.
you know what I hear, in the programs I run around fatherhood, we talk a lot about creating your own definition of success.
Yeah,
And what I hear in this last bit right here is you saying like my definition of success isn't about my career, right? It's not live to work, it's work to live.
right.
And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's where a lot of us dads get stuck, because from a cultural perspective, we're told that it should be the other way around. And those of us that kind of have the courage to say, you know what, like my values, I want to be different than that. And then leading from that perspective, it sounds like that's what you've done. So was there a struggle earlier in your adulthood, in terms of thinking that way, or is that something that's always been natural for you? Or
No, it took me a while to get there. I think I definitely wanted to climb the corporate ladder, and my children's mother was very successful, and so wanting to keep up or catch up was some pressure that I put on myself to do, and that wasn't easy. And so yeah, and you're young, you're starting to have kids, you want to be able to get that house and start saving for education and start doing all these things, and so much of that is tied to success at work. And so that was probably always a struggle for me, and just feeling like, yeah, that's what I should be doing, but man, that's just not me. And so it did create probably more personal conflict with and trying to balance the mindset that I have about work with certainly what I don't. And so yeah, that was probably the earliest hard parts with it, and it's just that reconciliation and wanting to do more at home because their mom is doing more, and so that was tough.
And what was your technique to kind of manage that when it got kind of big in your head? Yeah.
Yeah, I think back then I didn't really have a technique. I think that's probably one of the things that came up more later in therapy, and when I actually started running and just self-reflecting more and thinking of what happiness was and the things that made me happy, and when I felt my best and my strongest, and it that really started to create that wedge between how I feel at home or running or doing endurance sports and just kind of punching a clock at work. And so it was a long process to get there, but I certainly also think that my inability to have a way to cope with it or work through it back then, probably led to some of the unhappiness and part of the reasons the marriage didn't work. I mean, I think it's certainly a piece because there's a lot that I needed to learn and a lot that I needed to work on that probably brought much more conflict to the relationship than I was capable of thinking.
That's a beautiful point. So then let me ask you, because you have growing teenage children. So how do you apply the lessons that you've had? Obviously, not in a lecture type way, especially with teenagers, right? So how do you apply some of that into their lives so that maybe it's not as challenging for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of it started with loving the car rides. One of my children go to school in a town, about 8 miles away, and having the opportunity for them to sit in the back seat and you drive, I feel is one of the best opportunities to have conversations with young kids. That changed the year of COVID and everything, but leading up to that, those were some of the best times and opportunities I feel to just open up the open-ended questions with the kids to get their sense. I've always been more of a listener anyway, as an introvert and somebody that doesn't often talk about themselves. And so I could fire away 100 questions on a 20-minute car ride, and trying to balance that without them getting annoyed, but to really dig in just to get a sense and feel for where they're at as a developing person and a human out there. So I think those were foundational. And then as they got older, just always having those ears for them and trying to be there however they allow you in. Because that's the other technique that was tough to learn when you have three different personalities, your own personality, three different communication styles, wants, needs. I feel that the lessons that I learned as a people leader at work, but also the lessons I learned being a guide for blind athletes, where, you have these people that are so capable, they just need a little assistance in pointing them in the right direction. It's the same with the kids, but you got to be a little bit of chameleon to really maximize what you're trying to get out. It's not the same technique or the same questions or the same phrasing. It's really, going into your quiver and trying a bunch of different arrows to see if you can just get something out to really help.
I love that. And it's absolutely what I've seen as I coach leaders, right? From the perspective of communication, but also why I talk about like our training as parents can be the best leadership training we get, because recognizing that you have these different different processes to communicate in order to get your message across, and that's the only way it's going to work, especially as they get older,
Yeah.
is a pretty significant thing to realize. Fantastic. So tell me, at the moment, especially, I just watched Adolescence, so I'm like, so I'm struggling with like just that the weight of what I am imagining, because my kids aren't teenagers yet, in terms of what we have to manage around social media and all the stuff that's behind closed doors. For you, where do you struggle the most right now as a dad to teenagers?
Yeah. I mean, I think when I got to become an adult, I thought that all of the words and language was capped. Like we have maxed out on words that exist, and their ability to just come up with a whole new language, it seems daily, is phenomenal. And yeah, and so that's a tough one because I don't it I've never been in a position where I'm, saying the wrong thing because of it, because it's its own slang, and you either know or you don't, and it's not like something you're just going to accidentally run into. But yeah, I mean the social media stuff was big. It's like, when do you decide to allow your kid to have a cell phone and have access to these things, and do you need to be checking in? And because yeah, there's a lot of terrible stories, and scary place to just let them go out on their own. But um, yeah, I think it goes back to conversations and trying to talk with them to see if there's signs, and to make sure we're checking in and asking the right things to see if everything kind of passes some of just the smell test that you get with, this somebody seems like they're prying a little bit too much, or too heavy, or this just doesn't seem right, and learning how to shut those off. But and it's also different with the boys and the girls. I mean, our son was just more just connectivity to his friends and his online groups, where I generally see a lot more examples of the bullying and the ganging up on the young girl side. And that's, it's sad, but it's also, with it being a reality, finding ways to check in on those things as well. Because it's not, we often think that our daughter or kid is going to be on the side of being bullied, but finding out if they're on the other side and being the bully. And so, yeah, it's a lot of hard conversations and digging, but very important.
Thank you for sharing it. What's the biggest question then that you're sitting with right now as a dad?
Um,
And you like questions.
yeah. I mean, I think with teenagers, I think the question's changed, and so I think that's a great question to ask. I think right now is, um, have I done something to mess them up going to adulthood, or have I led them astray? That they're gonna make these decisions as a young adult that are just terrible. Like these one-time major mistakes or something that's gonna just completely change the shape of their lives, and send them on this course because I didn't suggest or recommend, or I didn't have the conversation. So I think it's definitely the not enough, and you can apply that in 100 different ways, across the board.
That lends itself to this idea of letting go too, right? Especially as they're getting older. And how do you apply that skill? Because that sounds particularly difficult.
Well, oftentimes that's not your choice. And the best example I can give of this is, dropping my son off in Boston. So we're in Madison, Wisconsin. He and I drove out there. That's where he's going to college, and, dropped him off the Friday before Labor Day. And, we were supposed to do dinner that night, but he forgot to look, and the campus and school had stuff already scheduled for him. And so it was a kind of a quick goodbye in the dorm instead of a dinner, nice to see you. And then by the time I got back home Saturday, he turned off Life 360, so I couldn't see where he was. I couldn't track him. He got his ears pierced, and, I'm getting maybe one word replies back via text, every third or fourth day. And yeah, so it was a lesson for me, and just a reminder that, yeah, he's not upstairs, where if he's not writing back or I haven't spoken to him, I can just kind of walk in and knock on the door and see his annoyed face, and, him telling me to leave, even though he's not telling me to leave, but at least I got to see him. And so, but yeah, that was not chosen. That one just happened, and it was a good lesson for me.
That sounds actually pretty raw. I'm trying to imagine that with my kids. Like, how are you managing that emotionally? Because yeah, that's very recent and a big letting go.
Yeah.
Like I would imagine there's like a hole there. Yeah.
Yeah, there is. And when I sat on the plane in Boston getting ready to leave, that's kind of when a lot of the emotion let out. And I was just like, damn, this is real. I mean, this is really real. And, all the emotions that I've carried since then, it's really been more about oh, I wish I could get this, or I wish, he would do this for me. It was more things about what I wanted, when in reality, it's the best thing is, he's doing the things for himself that he wants and he's choosing to do. And, it's been the whole point of all these years of school for him to go off and do this. And so I'm trying to be more thankful for it, that he's taken this path and gone and doing exactly what I would want him to do. It's just I have my wants and missing my son and missing our conversations and wanting for him to reach out more so I can still have those and have different pieces. And it's just the mindset that it's different pieces now, and it's not the same, but that's not a bad thing.
I will my whole life remember my mother this like right before I started my senior year of college telling me essentially, I don't ever want you to come home or to call me because you feel like you have to. I want you to do it because you want to. And literally, this is over 30, almost 30 years ago now. And I still remember it
Yeah.
as this thing that like freed me, one of guilt, which, there was no reason in particular that I would have it, but also, as I've become a parent, made me realize how hard that must have been for her to do as well.
Mhm.
And I can only imagine like your experience. And then you still have, so there's two still at home, or one, two.
Two.
And what has changed in the dynamic with one out and two at home? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot. The two that remain, they go to different high schools, and so they have different friend circles, and they're, to me, they're kind of like fun cousins a little bit, in those interactions, less sibling, less friend, but when cousins get together, it's a good time. And so that continues. My son was so kind of secluded, and he worked, and the last year of school, high school, he had very limited classes, and so he was working more. And so I think the dynamic overall hasn't changed a whole lot. The girls are still, kind of their dynamic that they've always had. It's just a little more quiet, a little less music being played. And yeah, but they have a good flow and a good relationship, and so far it hasn't impacted it a whole lot. My daughter's pretty active this year. She decided to pick up dance, and so she's got kind of more commitments before school, and then she's the boys varsity soccer manager, and so commitments after school. And so she's, now that school started back up, it's been very limited time with her for anybody.
Well, so if they're going in schools in opposite directions, and they have before school and after school, I imagine driver's licenses potentially as well. Where are these deep or connection conversations happening now?
Now it's a lot different, and it's a lot harder. My daughter, has a great relationship with her mother, and so she usually spends a little bit more time there, here and there. And so I'm respectful of that and support that as much as she needs. Her social network is in a different town, and all of her friends. And so, being more connected there at this age is important to her. And so I support that. And so with her, I'm really trying to check in as much as I can. And so it is texting. It is kind of a random phone call. It is, I'm on Snapchat just so I can keep streaks alive with them. It's just continuing to find ways to interact that they're allowing me in. And so it has gotten harder as they're busy, but I just try to do everything I can it's kind of like drip marketing, where it's just I don't expect responses, but I just want them to know I'm thinking about them. I'm here. And then, if I call and they don't answer, that's okay. But just to, I want them to know that I'm still trying to support them as best I can, even though I'm not always right there, side by side with them. And again, that's different. That's my daughter, Emmy. But then, Megan's daughter, Mara, she will get into these conversations. And, I'm like, hey, I'm going to go run to the store. You want to come? Sure. And so, getting that side by side, and then just letting the conversation go where it goes. That's always been my approach with a bonus daughter. I'm not trying to be something that I'm not. I'm not her dad. I just want to be a respectful male role model that she sees in somebody that's taking care of her mom and the kids, and but is also there to listen and talk about whatever subject's coming up.
I hear you. And I'm imagining how different your conversations are at the supermarket with your daughter versus my 5-year-old son, where it's constantly, no, you cannot have Frosted Flakes. No, we cannot buy more chocolate.
Yeah.
No, we cannot get this candy bar. Very interesting. And tell me what it's like from an evolving stress level, thinking about like college, because now you've one that you're obviously got to start paying for and two more on the way. How has that entered your life in terms of all the tensions that we as dads carry? Because it is even the dads that I speak to whose kids are like 2, they're already thinking about this stress. And you're in real time now. So how does that enter your anxiety zone?
Yeah, I would say for me, I've always had the money is kind of the money part, and you save what you can or what you did. I'm not opposed to loans and student loans, because if that's the school you need to go to and the money's not there, that's the only way it's going to happen. And having those conversations with them so they're aware of that. Uh, I'd say the bigger stressors with it have been just the pressure that they put on themselves. Megan's daughter, Mara, she's one of these kids that it just blows my mind at a very young age. She was just doing her homework. She was studying. She was more concerned and worried about the quality of her work, at a really early age. And it was hilarious. The summer before her freshman year in high school, she comes out to Megan and I and says, I'm going to join volleyball. I need to do more after school activities. I need to join clubs, and I got to take all these advanced, AP classes and all these things. And we're like, okay, well, why? And she's like, well, if I want to get in, I want to be able to get accepted to all these amazing schools. I don't want to go to all of them, but I want to get accepted and have, the Princetons and the Harvards and, these highest, hardest schools to get into look at me and say, okay, we would accept this candidate. And then she just went. It's like she had her plan and her mindset and went. And with her, it's been trying to just bring those stress levels down and just, try to bring her back. She's like, well, I don't even know if I can get into Wisconsin as like a backup. And I'm like, let's think through this. She's like, Wisconsin's got a 45% acceptance rate. I'm like, all right, well, let's think at the average. What would the average student look like that's applying to the school? And where do you feel you're on that scale? And, she got to agree that she's better than average. I argue she's much better than average, but she's, gives herself higher than average. I'm like, all right, so really, if you're better than average, then, your percent chance to get in is better than 45%. Can we agree on this? Yeah, I guess so. So it those conversations are just all over, and you take them as they come, and just try to manage their stress levels with it, because I don't want to add to it. I don't want to, apply unnecessary pressure by bringing anxiety or worry. And so that's where, again, I come with questions and let them, help lead them to a calmer spot with it.
I love that. Have you developed any unique traditions as a family, particularly as a blended family, that you really engage in?
Yeah, I mean, an early one. So I grew up on homemade pancakes, my mom's recipe, and our schedule was such that, in the beginning, every other weekend is when we were all together. And so every other weekend on Sunday when we're all together, I'd make homemade pancakes, Megan makes a bacon, and that was just one of our home team traditions, and the kids always embraced it. Whenever we celebrated a birthday, on the weekend, I would, do the number of their birthday in a pancake. It would look awful, but, still just to, here's a 1 and a 0 pancake, and, put the candle and light that. So I think breakfast has always been a good one for us, but we also, Megan and I love cooking, and we always have. And so just even having that time to sit down and having that time on the table, and just to just to be there and, unwind from the day and just kind of regroup. That certainly got harder as the kids got older. Even if they were home, they're like, oh, can't we go eat in the other room? Or, can I take this to the room? It's like, no, let's just sit here. I mean, we have the opportunity of all of us to do this maybe 1 or 2 nights a week. But that's been a big one. And I think the other one is travel. We don't have expensive vehicles. We don't have a huge house, and we've chosen to want to share experiences with the kids. And that's been amazing. I mean, this summer we went. I'm looking at your picture in the background, and we were on an African safari in South Africa, and last year we were in Spain. We've done many of the national parks, so those things have all been right now they've always seemed very more meaningful to Megan and I. They always, they could seem a little unappreciative. And, the famous quote is, this is just another rock when we're standing looking down into the Grand Canyon. It's like, but I do feel that as time has gone on, having them tell stories about those trips and places. And so, experiences is definitely what we try to provide and give from a standpoint of something meaningful.
It's very clear to me that you've really reflected and have a set of values, definition of success that you really kind of lean into when you're raising this blended family. And it definitely comes out in this conversation. I really appreciate it, and I recognize it. So
thank you.
And that's very inspirational. I love to totally turn it in the opposite direction. I love to end our podcast with kind of a funny story, because fatherhood is super messy. So if you can remember back when your kids were infants, what's kind of the weirdest, grossest, bowel movement, pee story, something that you have that just makes you go, yep, this is fatherhood in a nutshell?
That's a tough one. I don't know if it's just I'm so far removed from the infant stage, but if I'm honest, I love the infant stage. It was one of the hardest as a dad, because this kid is very needing of their mother, and they don't necessarily recognize you right away. But if anybody has an infant, I'm your babysitter, because they're crying. They either want to sleep, they need their diaper changed, or they need to eat, and that's it. And then you just hold on to that little oven that's just generating this heat, and you just sit there in amazement. I'm struggling with the really messy. I know they were there, but I guess I also just kind of expected it and rolled with it, and, was never put in too much of an awkward situation, that it would have made a funny story. So I guess I'm kind of failing on that one.
That's quite all right, but it sounds like you're volunteering to be a babysitter. So we will make sure to put your phone number and email address in the show notes, and people can reach out.
Yeah, I'm all about that. I love that.
Well, look, Kelly, I really, really appreciate how honest and vulnerable you've been, just to talk about kind of all the stages of growth from your perspective as a dad, as a husband, and now even with your son going off to college. It's really been a pleasure to kind of hear all this, and I know our audience will really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
No, you're welcome. This is a pleasure, and I think what you're doing is great, and the conversations are great, and more men need this than they will admit.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.